In the 3 previous episodes, we looked at what the biblical principles concerning the nature of man, the nature of government, the nature of God, and the 3 God-ordained governments said about the concentration of power, and discovered how all of them directs us towards a limited and decentralized system. We continued this theme in this episode by examining how 1 Samuel 8, the accounts of Kings Ahab, Uzziah, and Nebuchadnezzar, and Exodus 18, 13-26 relate to decentralization. Let's begin with 1 Samuel 8. We learned that when Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders, but his sons did not follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. This led the elders of the Israelites to tell Samuel to appoint them a king for 2 reasons. First, the sons he appointed as judges were corrupt, and second, other nations have a king. Samuel is displeased and takes his concerns to God in prayer. God tells Samuel that it is not you who they have rejected, but me. They have rejected me as their king. He then tells Samuel to warn the Israelites that if they have a king, the king will act as though he is God by taking 1/10 of their flocks, taking 10% of their grain and vineyards, and by taking the best products of their fields, vineyards, and olive groves. He will take their sons as soldiers or for farming or hard labor, and their daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. Ultimately, he warns, the king they ask for will oppress them. The Israelites did not heed God's warnings and still insisted on having a king like other nations. Ultimately, the people rejected God and his method of judges. They rejected the separation and decentralization of authority and insisted on a king, insisted on a system of concentrated and centralization of authority, a system God warns will oppress them. An interesting bit of biblical trivia that to a certain extent also points to decentralization is comparing the age of the judges with the age of the kings. When doing so, you will notice that more heroes of the faith come from the decentralized era of the judges than the concentrated and centralized era of the kings. Next, let's look at the biblical accounts of King Ahab and Naboth's vineyard, King Uzziah and his burning of incense, and Nebuchadnezzar's pride and arrogance. In the story of King Ahab and Naboth's vineyard, we learn that the state, too, is subject to God's laws, that in God's eyes, the civil government can steal and murder, that the civil government is not above the 8th or 6th commandments. King Ahab is punished by God for violating these laws. King Uzziah, we learn, becomes prideful and unfaithful to the Lord. He enters the temple of the Lord to burn incense, but is confronted by a large group of priests telling him it is not right for you to burn incense to the Lord. That responsibility, that authority is for the priests. God punishes him as a result with leprosy. Of the several lessons we learn from this passage, one is that it supports the principle of sphere sovereignty, of separation of church and state. King Nebuchadnezzar, similar to Uzziah, becomes proud and arrogant about his empire and his power. As a result, God punishes Nebuchadnezzar, showing very clearly that it is God who is sovereign, above kings, above nations, above all. These accounts of Kings Ahab, Uzziah, and Nebuchadnezzar all show that they are subject to God and his law, and that their designed role is limited and must not infringe upon the distinct spheres of other aspects of life. Last, we'll look at Exodus 18, 13-26. We discover in this passage that Moses is serving as judge for the people from sunup to sundown, which his father-in-law says is not good because it will wear him and the people who come to him out. The burden is too heavy. Instead, his father-in-law tells Moses to do as God commands, to select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, 50s, and 10s. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. You will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied. From this biblical account, we learn that it is proper for civil government to adjudicate. We learn that delegation of authority is wise and necessary, that we need a balance in life. Furthermore, this passage shows that Moses created a representative government. He was to select and appoint capable men who fear God and hate dishonest gain, trustworthy men. But Moses does not know every Israelite personally. There are hundreds of thousands of men. It was the people who selected or elected their representative, because they know which men have the qualities and characteristics God commands. Notice these elections do not confer authority. God does that. Instead, the primary role of elections is to hold leaders accountable. We also learn that Moses was to teach the selected leaders God's decrees and instructions, which tells us civil leaders must operate under God's law and not by the whims of man or the will of the majority, making the system a republic, a government of laws and not of men. Finally, we discover the principle of subsidiarity from the passage's instructions to have the people divided into thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens to handle the cases they can, saving the difficult ones for Moses. Problems, we learn, should be handled as close to their origins as possible. This is subsidiarity. Human activity ought to be governed at the lowest level possible, leaving higher orders of community with only those functions they alone can accomplish. Not only is this commanded, it is wise, prudent, and practical. It is not healthy for society to take away every task to be handled by a central government. To take away responsibility from the individual, from the family, and from the church is to violate or offend their dignity. The more a community relegates tasks to the state or federal government, the more the local community withers away. The local community is left with nothing to do, which will cause civic spirit and virtue to fade. Based on the principle of subsidiarity derived from Exodus 18, a task or responsibility should only be delegated to a higher authority when the more local authority cannot do it. If the individual can take care of a task, he should. If not, it moves up to his family. The family should take care of the task. If it cannot, then it moves up to the church or local civic group or community. If they find a task they cannot perform, then it goes to the county government, then state government, and last, the federal government. And when possible, any relegating of authority to higher, more concentrated levels of power should be temporary. Applying the biblical principle of subsidiarity will effectively limit the size and scope of civil government to its proper bounds. If all things that can be addressed as locally as possible were addressed as locally as possible, then there would not be much left for the state, and particularly the federal government, to do. By the time you get to the state, and especially the federal government, only a few tasks would remain. The founding fathers of this federal republic understood this. Consider the following quote from Thomas Jefferson. "The way to have good and safe government is not to trust it all to one, but to divide it among the many, distributing to every one exactly the functions he is competent to perform best. Let the national government be entrusted with the defense of the nation and its foreign and federal relations, the state governments with the civil rights, laws, police, and administration of what concerns the state generally, the counties with the local concerns of the counties, and each ward, township, direct the interest within itself. It is by dividing and subdividing these republics, from the great national one down through all its subordinations, until it ends in the administration of every man's farm by himself, by placing under everyone what his own eye may superintend, that all will be done for the best." What has destroyed liberty and the rights of man in every government which has ever existed under the sun? That generalizing and concentrating all cares and powers into one body, no matter whether of the autocrats of Russia or France, or of the aristocrats of a Venetian Senate. To conclude, a plethora of biblical principles and accounts shows that the Bible supports, to a great extent, if not mandates, a limited, decentralized system of government. And at the same time, logic reveals it is also the most pragmatic and practical.